moving right along to Stefan Zunes.
Hello there.
Oh, hi, Stefan. Is it Stefan or
It's Steven Zunes.
Steven Zunes? Thank you for being on Organic News on Awake Radio. I'm just trying to pull up. I got so many tabs open. I can't find yours. But anyway, like, we are going to talk about the recent Paris attacks.
Mm-hmm.
And you're a professor at San Francisco University.
I'm a professor of politics at the University of San Francisco and coordinator of the Middle Eastern Studies program there.
And so what is your take on this Paris attack, and who is truly to blame?
It is a terrible tragedy. It's committed by a group that's known in the Middle East as Daesh, also known as the Islamic State and ISIL, various versions of it. It's basically a cult, a very extremist cult, which uses a very distorted version of Islam to try to justify their brutal theocratic rule. They claim they're trying to build a new caliphate in the Middle East, but while historically caliphates are hardly democracies, they certainly not engage in the kinds of savage repression that this group is engaged in. But in any case, they have done enormous harm in Iraq and Syria and some other places. They've committed terrorist attacks in Lebanon and Syria, other countries as well. Lebanon, Turkey, and other countries as well. But striking Western Europe was particularly horrific, I think, at least in the eyes of Westerners. And of course, being Paris, it's a city we all love. It does indicate that they are capable and willing to strike Western targets. France, as you may know, has been bombing targets in Syria, bombing ISIS for the past year, and this is their way of striking back against it. Of course, all the casualties were innocent civilians out enjoying a Friday evening in Paris. But I think it's important to note the origins of Daesh, the Islamic State. They're an Iraqi-led group, which was a direct outgrowth of the U.S. invasion and occupation of Iraq. I was one of a number of people. Barack Obama actually was another who was warning that if the United States invaded Iraq, it would lead to a reaction that could lead to the rise of this radical sectarianism and extremism. Groups comparable to Al Qaeda, and maybe even worse. And sure enough, that's exactly what happened. Daesh, ISIS, is an overwhelmingly Iraqi-led organization. Most of the leaders were former prisoners during the U.S. occupation, where many were tortured and served as part of their radicalization. Their military commanders are many people who were in the original Iraqi army that instead of integrating, we ended up leaving them unemployed, again, imprisoning a lot of them. So basically, and they're young recruits. They've interviewed these young recruits. Many of these people aren't particularly religious, but they want vengeance because of what the U.S.-backed Iraqi government, which is a sectarian Shia regime, has done to them, as well as the U.S. occupation, what it's done to their fathers and brothers and others. There's a lot of anger at the United States out there, and from what we've done in that part of the world, and unfortunately, this fanatical cult has taken advantage of that anger and anger towards the Assad regime in Syria and the West in general to create this movement that has not only taken over large swaths of territory in Iraq and Syria, but is now striking targets in the West.
And so would the term blowback be a good term to describe what's happening?
Well, very much so. I mean, in the 25 years or more before the invasion of Iraq, there were a total of 385 suicide bombings. Less than 10% went after American targets. Since then, there have been over 2,000, and 90% of them have been against the United States or close allies. It's really been we've unleashed this monster. I mean, the U.S. basically thought supporting this sectarian Shiite regime in Iraq would help suppress the supporters of Saddam Hussein, who are mostly Sunni. We engaged in kind of divide and rule kind of practice. And the fighting between Sunnis and Shias is not really, I mean, it's sort of evolved into be something more sectarian. This is not a conflict that's been going on for hundreds of years. I mean, yes, they had their battles back in 700 whatever and 1200 whatever, but Sunni Shia fighting was as rare as Protestant Catholic fighting. And theologically, there's less difference between Sunnis and Shias than between Catholics and Protestants. But this sectarian thing that the U.S. imposed created a situation where a lot of Iraqi Sunnis saw the Shiite-led government as a kind of collaborationist in the way that many Irish nationalists in Northern Ireland saw the Protestants as a whole as being guilty for the British control of Northern Ireland, and so they started blowing up Protestant pubs, and the Ulster Unionists started blowing up Catholic pubs, and it kind of evolved in that way. So it wasn't about religion per se; it was about the way the nationalisms corresponded. Well, similar, we have a thing in Iraq. It's that it became one of a nationalist assertion to what people saw as a Shiite-led government that was more loyal to the United States and Britain and Iran, ironically, and the tit-for-tat killings increased. The U.S. actually supported these death squads that killed thousands of innocent Sunni men. We ended up in a situation where Al-Qaeda arose in Iraq. Fortunately, the local Sunnis turned against them, and realizing they were even a bigger threat in return for being incorporated more into the Iraqi army and Iraqi government. But the Maliki regime that the U.S. was backing in Baghdad refused to go in their end of the bargain. And then you had the rise of Daesh, of ISIS, which ended up taking over much of northern Iraq. And again, this is very much part and parcel of blowback from the U.S. invasion occupation. If it was not a U.S. invasion occupation of Iraq, there would not be ISIS.
Exactly. So it's kind of this example of, you reap what you sow. And then when they do, this country or the people who created this, get the consequences of what they created, they're not going to, they don't want to accept the responsibility, and they're just going to try to blame ISIS or Edward Snowden.
The Snowden stuff is really ridiculous. There's no link there whatsoever. I mean, obviously, first and foremost, Daesh, ISIS is responsible. I mean, it's important to contextualize the rise of terrorism. Let's not forget that those ultimately responsible, of course, are the ones who engage in the terrorism. At the same time, I think it's quite legitimate to point out how this is a direct outgrowth of U.S. policy, in the hope that we can have more enlightened policies in the future. Now, of course, it's ironic that some of the very people who supported the war, many Republican leaders and even Hillary Clinton, have in many ways blamed Obama for not being militaristic enough, for not bombing enough, for not sending enough troops, for pulling out of Iraq, even though we were required to as a result of a treaty that was signed by George W. Bush just a couple months before he left office. And I really don't trust that you're seeing these very pundits who got us into this mess in the first place, being paraded on TV right now, trying to say, what do we do now? Well, don't trust these guys. If you supported the Iraq War when you knew darn well that it could result in this kind of thing, it wasn't just me saying this. It wasn't just Barack Obama saying this. And we were hearing this from retired foreign service officers. We're hearing that from academics. We were hearing it, from people in the Middle East itself, and they chose to ignore it. Obama has bombed 7 Muslim countries since he came to office, and this idea that somehow he's not bombing enough. And give me a break. I'm not a pacifist. I'm not saying that when you're dealing with a very, very real serious threat, actual intelligence of some kind of paramilitary strike might be necessary to protect lives. But this idea of making it another long, drawn-out war with no end in sight that's going to probably end up causing even more blowback in the future and more generations of extremists who hate us, this is simply, this kind of policy simply is not going to work.
I mean, in your opinion, the people that are creating this mess, I mean, are they just incompetent? I mean, I
think there are a number of things. I think there's this. I think there's a tendency, and this is true of the left as well as the right, that the United States can do everything, or we're responsible either for good or for ill for whatever happens in the world, and part of this, part of it grows out of a positive thing, this idea of American know-how, anybody can do it, that kind of spirit, but it can also then end up in hubris. It can also end up in arrogance. It can also end up in this idea that we can shape the world just the way we want it because we're number one, because we have the biggest military, or we have a lot of money, or whatever. And I think there are those who really did have this idea that the United States should create an empire, that by controlling parts of the Middle East, with the oil resources, we could kind of set the world agenda. We no longer had to abide by the United Nations Charter, which is signed and ratified document, signed and ratified international treaty, is under the Article 6 of the U.S. Constitution, the supreme law of the United States. We decided that people like George W. Bush and his congressional supporters, including Hillary Clinton, basically said, we don't have to abide by the rules anymore. We don't have to. We can engage in aggressive war. We can invade a country on the far side of the world that's no threat to us, just because they might potentially be a threat someday. Now, can you imagine if every country in the world took that attitude? You'd have countries invading people all over the place, but there's this kind of arrogant attitude. Well, we're America, so we get to do what we want. And I think that was.
I was gonna just say real quick. It sounds like this global stop and frisk.
Yeah. Only it's a lot worse. And that. And I think. And I mean, there might have been some. I don't think democracy was ever an issue. I mean, I don't think the architects of the war wanted to install Ahmed Shaladi or some willing collaborator. They actually opposed having direct elections. They wanted to have a viceroy appoint a committee to elect the president. I mean, the evidence is very strong. There's no interest really in having a democracy in Iraq. After all, I mean, look who our allies are in the Middle East. Most of them are these dictatorships. Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Bahrain, Oman, Qatar, Kuwait. Morocco. It's just Egypt, etc. I mean, and even Israel, which is a democracy for its Jewish citizens. I mean, its occupation policies and the siege and attacks on civilian targets in Gaza. I mean, they're not. That's not very democratic. So our policy, I don't think invading Iraq was about democracy. I think it really was about empire, and it's unfortunate that it's not the people who voted for this war, like Hillary Clinton, whose kids are being sent over to fight. They're usually people from poor working class backgrounds, disproportionately people of color, and of course on the other end. You have hundreds of thousands of people who have died and are continuing to die as a result of this decision.
Can you describe what the role of 9/11 is in all of this?
Well, it was an excuse. I mean, for the invasion of Iraq. I mean, certainly, the September 11th, 2001 attacks by Al Qaeda were horrific. And there needed to be a response, primarily in the area of intelligence or interdiction. And again, it could have, definitely would, would probably need in some cases, a paramilitary component to it, such as the raid that ended up killing Osama bin Laden. The idea that that you can have a war on terror, I mean, that's ludicrous. Al-Qaeda, like ISIS, is more like an international criminal syndicate. High-altitude bombing, really doesn't do that much, again, especially around Al-Qaeda, which is a decentralized network of terrorist cells. And I think people use the genuine fear that a lot of Americans had following 9/11 as an excuse to invade Iraq, even though Iraq had nothing to do with 9/11, nothing to do with Al-Qaeda. Saddam was actually actively suppressing elements sympathetic to Al-Qaeda. Osama bin Laden declared that Saddam was an apostate, an infidel, a traitor to Islam, and he should be overthrown. The idea that they would be collaborating, or Saddam would somehow give him weapons of mass destruction that he didn't even have to give. I mean, nobody familiar with the Middle East, or took half a minute to study, would believe that line. And yet, you had the Bush administration saying that. You had leading Republicans saying that. Even Hillary Clinton said that. And I remember contacting her office. This is ridiculous. How could you say this? Oh yeah, we're sure it's true. But I think they're just basically trying to frighten the American people and supporting the invasion. So I think in terms of the invasion of Iraq and the rise of ISIS, that again, 9/11 provided people the excuse, but there isn't any direct correlation in terms of the what happened in New York that fateful morning.
I mean, with all the surveillance that we've had in this country even before 9/11, I mean, the fact that they're not able to intercept or know that this is coming, and then be so lax. I mean, even after the towers got attacked, I mean, the response, the Air Force, I mean, it was...
Yeah. I don't think there's any conspiracy involved, but I think it was indeed quite a serious breakdown of in intelligence. And I mean, I think it really showed that, I think, trying to turn it into a war, and get people to rally around the flag and support getting involved in these land wars in these far-off countries, that's not the... in many ways, that was a distraction from where there really was incredible incompetence. Indeed, and it looks like in the case of the Paris attacks, French intelligence, which have been engaged in even more heavy-duty surveillance than we've experienced here in the United States from our government. I think the fact that the President Hollande would go on and talk about this all-out war, whatever, and instead of saying we messed up, we need to do better, and to really focus on prevention. So I think that's really. I mean, I guess the more I actually study the people who make decision making, the more I read government documents, the more I interview people in current and present positions of authority, or current and previous positions of authority. The less I'm prone to support conspiracies, and the more I am to recognize the way ideology and the way other rigidities can give people the kind of hubris that makes them able to screw up in so many profound ways, and then try to make up for it by doing something even worse.
Right. Just keep the vicious cycle going. Just keep doing more of what doesn't work.
Yeah, exactly.
I just wanted to mention, a comment that, Bill Binney had said. I interviewed him a couple of times, and he, I mean, there's just like this common theme with like different people that I interview, and the NSA, they get more money, when there are things, like terrorism and things like that.
Yeah. There's certainly things in the system that, that make it easier for those who want a more militaristic response to gain the upper hand. And when you have, if you're looking at a series of policy options, obviously, those advocating, positions that will personally benefit them will be particularly mobilized to get the ear of the decision makers. And so I don't think the fact that there are those in this country who profit from these kinds of misguided policies. I'm not saying they aren't a factor in the in the direction that we take. But again, that's not necessarily President Obama or whoever is saying, oh, this will be terrible for our country and the world, but I need to keep these people satisfied. It's not that simple. But the very fact that that people who do have a stake in the system are and have the money to hire the lobbyists, to hire the consultants, to parade their favorite pundits on the talk shows, they certainly do have influence. No question about it.
Let me just lastly ask you about the refugees and allowing them into the United States, and also what you thought of the remarks from Donald Trump about surveilling refugees, and if he's president, he's going to make them go back where they came from.
Well, most of they can't go back to where they came from in many cases because their homes are physically destroyed. I mean, the war in Syria has just been absolutely devastating. Not just from terror from ISIS, but the Assad regime and their heavy bombing of urban areas it has caused this massive refugee flight. A couple of observations. First of all, we've had 750,000 people have been granted political asylum in the United States since 2001. Not one of them, not one, has been convicted of an act of terrorism. Not one, or even arrested. The fact is that these people, that the way that ISIS is losing power is not from the bombing, but because of this massive flow of people trying to leave the territories that they control. They need these people. They extort billions of dollars in taxes from these people. They're the ones who work in the basic services that keep things running. The more people leave, they're voting with their feet. That undermines their financial resources, which enables them to get guns and support terrorism, that kind of thing, and undermines their ability to rule. So in many ways, this attack in Paris may have been deliberate to create an anti-refugee reaction that would force people to go back, or at least people there would hear about, oh, the terrible things you're doing to refugees in Europe and the United States. I'm not going to even bother leaving, even though it's terrible here. So even putting aside what I believe is a moral obligation, and what I believe is a legal obligation in terms of international humanitarian law, in terms of fleeing refugees, even putting those arguments aside, in terms of our own self-interest, in terms of defeating ISIS, we really need to, let these people in, and especially, if they are, these people can tell local Muslims about how horrible things is. So if there's some misguided kid who dreams of joining the caliphate or whatever, he'll get to hear from an actual Syrian what this group really is like. So for all these reasons, I mean, this, and also one thing I should also mention, that the refugees that can afford to get as far as Europe and America tend to be, you have to pay smugglers and do all this kind of stuff, tend to be middle-class people. My daughter worked with the refugees in Greece for a couple months, and these people are like doctors, they're teachers, they're lawyers, they're they're shopkeepers, these are professionals.
Right.
These are people who could contribute to the economy.
Right.
And furthermore, the United States has the most strict vetting process of virtually any country in the world. So the idea that somehow letting in these refugees who are fleeing ISIS will somehow bring ISIS people in the United States, I mean, that's just ridiculous.
I wanted to refer to an article you wrote in The Progressive on the U.S. and ISIS. It was the one thing that I was able to find on the subject. We only have like 1.5 minutes left. It's actually from August of 2004, but I figured it's
14, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, 2014. That's what I meant to say. So I'm just going to read the first paragraph. At the start of classes 1 year ago, I was having to explain to my students why the United States appeared to be on the verge of going to war against the Syrian government. At the beginning of this semester, exactly 1 year later, I'm having to explain to my students why the United States may be on the verge of going to war against Syrian rebels. So, right, it's just like this progression of, I don't understand, like, why, nobody's investing in peace. Like, money does not go and fund, peace and diffusing.
Really, yeah, and I agree that I think I can't rule out that there may be necessary for some a security a military side of this whole equation. The very fact is that if we really want to stop terrorism, we would start supporting sustainable development and start supporting democracy. In the United States, I mean, if you look at our trade, like 80% of our foreign aid to the Middle East is in the form of military equipment. Our number one export to the Middle East, not consumer goods, not high tech, not agriculture, it's weapons. The majority of weapons that ISIS controls, their vehicles, their ordnance, their weapons, they're U.S. manufactured. Not that we gave them to directly, but because to give so much to so many people, they were able to capture it or buy it on the black market. We really need to reorder our priorities. It'll make us a lot safer.
Amen.
The more we militarize that region, the less and less secure we become.
Exactly. Thank you so much, Stephen Zunes. Your article in The Progressive and professor at San Francisco University, professor of politics.
Thank you. Great being with you.
And happy holiday.
You too.
Good night. Okay, lastly, I am going to play the entire interview with retired NYPD Detective Graham Weatherspoon of 100 Black Law Enforcement Who Care on the Tamir Rice anniversary. Okay, this is a pre-recorded interview for Organic News on Awake Radio today, Tuesday, November the 24th, with retired NYPD detective Mr. Graham Weatherspoon, who I originally met you a year or two ago when you spoke at the PROP event, Police Reform Organizing Project, about the quota system in the police department. And then you were out on Sunday at the Barclays Center in Brooklyn for the 1-year anniversary of the killing of 12-year-old Tamir Rice by Cleveland PD. And yeah, just explain why you were out for that on Sunday, if you would.
Well, good evening.
Yeah, thank you for interviewing me.
Glad to be here. We talk about the things that we see and some of the insensitivity that exists in the world. We also have a video of Tamir and the officers responding to that situation. Officers who, the initial one who stepped out of the car on the passenger side, used the recorder, and he just opened fire on this boy. That kind of behavior is not acceptable for professionally trained people.
Right.
I have been in those situations. I've been in situations where people tried to poke guns on me, young teenager tried to pull a gun on me following a robbery, and he almost lost his life. But I withheld for that moment, for that split second. And some police officers and unions may say, well, a split second can cost you your life. True, but that's not the reason for shooting somebody. Shouldn't be the sole reason for shooting somebody. I have arrested, conversely, the youngest person I've arrested with 2 firearms, not 1 but 2, was 12 years old. But we cannot be too quick to judge and fire a weapon, to take a life, and then not even say you're sorry later.
Right.
This boy was in a park. It's winter time. He's in a park. It's cold. There's no threat to anybody out there, even if he has a gun. And conversely, the officers were trained. You use your car for cover and concealment.
Right.
It's what police officers are taught. You don't throw yourself into the line of fire. And if I recall correctly, Tamir had his back to the car when the car pulled up. So the officers had a couple of options. They could have eased up behind him.
Right.
If they felt there was a threat, they could have taken cover. The guy in the passenger side could have got down low in the seat to provide himself with cover, and then instruct the boy to drop the weapon. The insensitivity that we see in New York, there was a man some years ago with a rifle in Rockefeller Center, firing shots. And he was arrested without another shot being fired. And he was a white man in Rockefeller Center with a rifle. And we had a guy in Times Square last year who was acting erratic, mentally ill. I can't remember all the details, but the police opened fire on him. It hit a number of other people in Times Square.
Wow.
He was black. But we can't afford to have children being taken, having their lives taken when people are overreacting to given situation, and then blaming the problem on the child.
Right.
It's like blaming the rapist for the fact that she got raped.
Right.
Oh, she look at the way she was dressed, and that's why she got raped. No, that's not acceptable. And also the death of Nicholas Hare was 21 years ago. Same scenario, with a police officer overreacting to a situation and taking the life of Nicholas, where nothing was even done. Nothing was done in that case, as we all know. A long introduction. Go ahead.
So I was just gonna make the point also that, I mean, clearly, because it was a toy gun that Tamir Rice was playing with, it wasn't like they even heard any shots being fired. So it's, I mean, clearly he wasn't firing anything. There was no noise there, so that I feel like is just, something that doesn't get mentioned. The second thing I wanted to bring up is the fact that Ohio is supposedly an open carry state for real weapons. And then, Tamir is over here getting killed for having a toy.
One thing is for sure, that open carry is not for a child.
Yeah.
Open carry is for adults. And again, you have to make certain assumptions. You have to give the benefit of the doubt when you see a kid. He's by himself. He's not with some friends. He's not running out of a store. No one is chasing him. You have to give the kid the benefit of the doubt that what he has is a toy. And again, they responded improperly. This thing could have been handled very differently. I've been in situations, I've been in bank robberies, all right? I've been in bank robberies. One of the bank robbers recognized me, right? I've had people with guns try to draw on me, right? Close, like right next to me, and try and draw their weapon. In 41 years of carrying a weapon, I've never discharged my weapon, never.
Wow.
And there are close to 24 people I could have legally killed under the statute of the law, but I never exercised that. I never exercised it. Not to say that I wouldn't if I had to, but the taking of a life should be the very last resort in every given situation. And we have people today that are quick to shoot.
Yeah.
And it's not, this is part of the culture that we are living in. And I said this Sunday, the police officers that we have come out of the society that we have. The good, the bad, and the ugly. And we've got good, bad, and ugly in our culture, in this country, in the world. Right? But the thing is that people have been desensitized more so now than 30 or 40 years ago. We use shock and awe in blowing people up in the Middle East. And I've asked people, have you ever seen a dead body? Have you ever seen a decomposing body rotting in the heat? Have you ever smelled that? Have you ever seen a disemboweled individual? Have you ever seen someone that's been shot through the head and their brains are scattered on the street? Have you ever seen that? Have you ever had to pick up a body that was torn apart? You see, it's easy to watch stuff on television. It's easy to watch jet planes dropping bombs and you see the flash, but there are people dying.
Right. I wanted to.
And that's not a joke.
In the interview that I did with you for the few minutes on Sunday in front of the Barclays Center, you know, you had mentioned one particular situation that you were in, and you said that you took the time to assess the situation. And you know, it made all the difference, which I believe is, you know, the problem is that everything is speed. Everybody's just like riding on momentum and you know, speed, and I'm always encouraging people to slow down, you know, take more time. It can make all the difference in the world.
It's very true. And that is not, I don't know if that's being taught to any degree or to a greater degree, because we also have a lot of people in policing who are scared. There are officers, for instance, in NYPD that come into the department never having interacted with a person of color, and that's absurd. There are police officers who come from out of town and they come into New York and they've never talked to a black person, and the only black people they know are what they've seen on television. So that's problematic. And conversely, we have black officers who have never really interacted with any white people except for a school teacher. So de facto segregation is broad and rampant in New York, but there are a lot of people who come into policing that don't know how to interact with people or have a preconceived notion of what people are and how they think and what they do and the danger that they present to them. We had a captain years ago who told a group of rookies in a roll call, if you get hurt, it'll invariably be a black or a Latino that hurts you. So treat them accordingly. He said, I killed one and I sleep well at night. And the one that he killed was a kid. He shot the kid in the back. All right. Now, when I got word of that statement, I called the chief of the department and he was relieved of his command. We can't have people like that giving instructions to rookies to go out on the street and believe that every black person they pass in a neighborhood is a potential threat. The issue of race is not discussed in this country. It's become more of an issue since Barack Obama became president. We see the total disdain and disrespect conveyed to him. So as it's conveyed to him, it's being conveyed to the people. It's being conveyed across the board. You see the disrespect of the congressman, the attitudes, which is purely racist, it's not political. And that is part of the quote-unquote trickle-down effect in this country. But we're not dealing with race. We're not dealing with it at all. It's ironic that NYU said a couple of years ago, their students said, after Obama was elected, they were saying that we're in a post-racist America. And then just yesterday, there were issues on the campus of NYU with regard to white people and black people. And I said, how interesting, in a post-racist era, as they put it 6 years ago.
They just had, I believe it was last night in Minneapolis, what they're calling, white supremacists that just openly fired on protesters. I have to look up exactly, they were, I think it was at the 4th precinct or something in Minneapolis. So
I heard something briefly, but I didn't get the full story myself. Yes.
And
the first report I got was that a police officer killed a black man, but I don't know, and I can't say I haven't gotten the news with all of the stuff with France. Hasn't gotten that information straight.
Also, I just wanted to mention at the vigil last night, there was another vigil last night for Tamir at the Grand Army Plaza, and each demonstrator was holding up, like a big poster of like about 4 or 5 facts about Tamir Rice. And on the second one, it said that the 9/11 caller that called, the police and said that there was a man with a gun in the park, said that it looks like a child and the gun is probably fake. And that information never got relayed to the dispatcher or back to the officers.
The officer. That lack of information, just the same, should not have yielded the results that we got with regard to Tamir.
And then, after they shot him and he was still alive, they didn't help him, and then they prevented his sister from getting to him.
Right. This is another thing. We have seen even police officers shot in New York and left lying on the street to die like garbage. There was an officer, Omar, can't remember his last name, housing cop, was shot up on 123rd Street and 3rd Avenue or 1st Avenue about 5 years ago. And he was shot while he was talking to a sergeant and another police officer. A third officer shot him in the back. He was chasing a guy who had broken his car. And it's interesting that the sergeant and the other officer saw no threat from Omar, but the third officer shot him in the back. And he lay there on the curb, bleeding. And it wasn't until EMS arrived and checked him and found his ID and realized that he was a police officer. Even in shooting an individual, your job is to render first aid.
Right. And they are. certified first
Okay.
responders. You know, that police are trained, you know, to be certified first responders.
You are to render first aid. You don't stand there and let an individual just bleed out. You have them under control. You then have to, you're responsible for your prisoner. You are responsible for your prisoner.
Right.
I had a fellow I arrested for a robbery in Lower Manhattan years ago, subway station. He jumped off the platform in the path of an oncoming A train. And he was already cuffed. He jumped off the platform. He was my prisoner. And you know what I had to do?
Uh-oh.
I had to jump off the platform too and get him before the train got him. All right? He was my responsibility.
Wow. That must have been a hairy situation to
Well,
be.
it was a little hairy, but, you know, that's what the job required. And it's not always about throwing your hand up in the air and just saying, well, I thought my life was in danger, so I did this, I did that. That's not an affirmative defense to kill somebody because you thought your life was in danger. You need to know for sure that your life is in danger or under threat of death with a weapon. An oncoming train is, you know, that was not the case with the train. But I did have to, and I was able to save that guy's life. So, you know, no one is drafted into the police department.
Right.
Everybody voluntarily steps in there. But unfortunately, everybody is not called for the job.
Right.
People want the job, they take it for whatever reason, but it's not the job for them.
Right.
And when we have people that can simply get the job because they passed the test, they passed the medical, they passed the physical, and a flim-flam psychological, and they're really not cut out for the job, people suffer.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the problem is formulating a better methodology and determining who should and should not be a police officer. And for certainly, a 21-year-old should not be carrying a gun, wearing a badge in New York City or in any police department. I don't think a 21-year-old is cut out for that any more than an 18 or a 19-year-old is cut out to be on the field of combat defending the country.
I agree. And it's almost, it's like they want them younger so that they can, you know, manipulate them or, you know, train.
There is a lot of that. Years ago, when I came in the department, guys were coming back from Vietnam. They were grown men. And some of the foolishness that goes on today, you could not tell a man back in the mid-70s coming back from Vietnam to do this, that, and the other. He'd look at you like you were crazy and just walk away. But these young kids don't have life experience. The stop and frisk issue, which the New York State Attorney General Spitzer said 14 years ago was improper. The way in which it was being done by Ray Kelly was improper. So he was totally disregarded by the police commissioner. Totally disregarded. So if the police commissioner can disrespect the highest law enforcement official in the state of New York, what do you think is going to happen with your police officers?
Right. I was
So stop and frisk it. Go ahead.
no, finish, and then if you could speak about the quota system.
Yes. Quotas have always been there. Always been there. Anybody that says there are no quota systems has never been a police officer, or they're just a blatant liar.
Yeah.
Right now, they have, over the years, they have required officers to write a certain number of summonses, and they were required to do a certain stop and frisk. You see, you cannot say The mayor and the commissioner cannot say that crime is at the lowest point it's been in 40 years, and the contacts with people is the highest it's ever been in 40 years. If there is no crime, if crime is down, you should not be interacting with people by arresting them, following illegal searches and seizures of marijuana, dragging them into court, where the district attorneys are throwing the cases out. There's a lack of integrity here. So, officers who have, see, years ago, when you made an arrest, when that case was finished with, paperwork had to be turned in. And if the chief received your paperwork and the case was dismissed, you had to write a report to the chief of the department explaining why the case was dismissed. We have had so many cases dismissed by the district attorneys in New York County because they know that some of these searches are illegal. But nobody is protecting the victims of the illegal search and seizure.
Right.
You can't do stop and frisk. Stop and frisk is to protect the officer when he believes that the person might have a weapon and it could be dangerous to them. Now, once you pat somebody down and there's no weapon, there's no cause for you to go in their pockets. That's illegal. It's a violation of constitutional law. So anything, it's called the fruit of the tainted tree. If the search is illegal, anything recovered in that search is inadmissible in court. So all these marijuana arrests that they've been making through illegal searches of fellas on the street going in their pockets, you can't tell me a joint poses a threat to a police officer.
Right.
So subsequently, they have an arrest. Some cases, the guys are let go before they get to the judge. They run out the door, they're happy. But the fact is that your fingerprints and your photographs are still in the system. And when you go to get a job, it shows up that you were arrested, which means you cannot get the job.
Yeah, you ruined
And
a person's life.
those records need to be expunged from the system.
Why don't they do that?
But-
I mean, if the person was, arrested like falsely, why do they keep them in the system?
Because the DAs have not been doing their job, the judges have not been doing their jobs, and by allowing these records to remain on file, you make it impossible for people of color to get work in the city that they live in.
I mean, having a quota system, I think it's ridiculous. It's like they want there to be crime, and and it seems pretty clear that the way that they approach these situations, they're not being approached in ways that are, trying to prevent crime or trying to help, anybody turn their life around. They're literally approaching these situations in order to accelerate. Like, they want the person to be a criminal. They want the person, to go to jail. Like, the agenda is already in motion. Like, you can just feel it and see it. That it's
Precisely, and we've had a few police officers who exposed it, as the officer in the 81st precinct in Bed-Stuy a couple of years ago, because you remember the show Andy Griffith.
Yep.
And you remember Barney Fife. He had one bullet and it was in his pocket. Okay. Police officers should not have to go out and generate revenue for the city of New York. By arresting people, having them fined, and bringing money into the coffers of the city of New York.
I mean, that's how
If there is no criminal activity, the police officers should be allowed to stand on the corner for 8 hours and just say, good morning, good afternoon, good evening.
Exactly.
But the top, the head of the department, along with the men, feel that cops should not come back in from an 8-hour tour having done nothing when the uniformed police officer's job is to deter crime. 1 second.
So I'm just going to say that Mr. Weatherspoon is.
I'm sorry.
That's you. So you founded the 100 Blacks in Law Enforcement Who Care,
I'm one of the founders, one of the founding members.
and that started in 1995 by a core group of concerned African Americans representing a variety of professions within the field of law enforcement. The number of those men and women who wanted to participate in being part of a social solution instead of a passive problem quickly grew to 100 and beyond. These individuals all shared a sense of community, cultural, and professional pride, and was accompanied by an unfulfilled desire to give back in some meaningful way. Through skillful organization and administration, 100 Blacks in Law Enforcement Who Care was born. And in that first year, $10,000 in grant monies was collected from the membership and distributed to needy individuals and organizations all over New York City.
All right, that was every year. Every year we did that.
Wow, that's pretty great.
Our membership was not only comprised of New York City police officers, but correction officers, parole officers, state and federal law enforcement personnel.
And the mission, it says, to fulfill moral mandate to our Creator, to enhance and cultivate the blessings that have been bestowed upon us, to serve as a model organization for individuals and other professionals in our communities so that we can again take our rightful place on the stage of history as free, proud, and productive people, to offer by way of non-repayable grants, a minimum of $1,000 a month to worthy cause in the African American community. And there are a few more to the mission statement. But yeah, we're pretty much out of time, and I just wanted to, thank you again, for interviewing with me, and keep up the good work. And I look forward.
Well, thank you, and I'm glad to be with you today, and I want people to pay attention to the case regarding Nicholas Harewood Jr. As it's being presented to Brooklyn DA Kenneth Thompson. That case was never put before a grand jury by Charles Hines.
Right. Right. The officer that killed him, they were acquitted. They were never charged.
Well, they were never charged.
Right.
Never charged. Never paneled before a grand jury. DA Hines took it upon himself to absolve the officer of any wrongdoing.
Right. Right. They just make up any law they feel like.
And keep in mind, DAs have immunity from prosecution.
Unbelievable. Unbelievable. Again,
It's
thank
a tricky system.
Yep. Graham Weatherspoon, retired NYPD detective, 100 Black law enforcement who care. Have a great holiday.
Thank you very much. God bless you and yours as well.
You
Thank
too,
you.
sir. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Okay, so that was Graham Weatherspoon, and that was a 2.5-hour show, Organic News on Awake Radio. I do this for no money. I really would appreciate if people go to YouTube and my YouTube channel, April Waters with 2 T's, a space between April and Waters. I'm so behind. I haven't even filled in so many of my videos, even from Rise Up October, are still on my YouTube channel without titles. So just doing so many things and having a hard time keeping up. So happy holiday. Eat free range Turkey if you must. Go to my YouTube channel and speak truth to power. Good night.